Guys, this is Jerningam here. This is Donald Trump coming off the plane to see Macron, I think.
Pause to manual and out he pops. Showtime for Boris Johnson on the biggest stage of his life so far, the one he's always dreamt of. He was virtually galloping down the stairs, clearly loving every minute of his new job. One thing you can't fault him on is his enthusiasm and good cheer. He sounds like a man in a hurry to make an impression with what he calls his obsessions.
Clearly, the state of global trade, I'm very worried about the way it's going, the growth of protectionism of tariffs that we're seeing. The UK thrives mightily on being an open, outward-looking, free-trading nation. That's what we're going to be promoting because I think it's good for the world as well. Number two, biodiversity, habitat loss, the excruciating scenes that we've seen from the Amazon.
Off to a bilateral meeting with the younger but by now far more seasoned Justin Trudeau of Canada, making sure that no one at home got the wrong idea about this summit.
I think people around the world will look at this and think, we're having a wonderful boondoggle here in some posh hotel in Biarritz. We're going to work flat out, aren't we, Justin? On issues that will make a material difference, we hope, to the quality of lives of everybody in our countries and around the world.
Justin looked fairly horrified at the thought of all that toil. If Boris Johnson is brimming with enthusiasm, his stage isn't. This is Biarritz at the height of summer. Nothing empties a top resort like a shark attack or a G7 summit. The echoing police hooves, more high noon than glitzy resort, a reminder of the realities that could collide with the Prime Minister's verve and vigour. First up, Europe. Donald Tusk, the embodiment
There's
of
Donald
the
Tusk.
EU at this summit, was channeling his inner doom merchant when he warned about a no-deal Brexit.
The one thing I will not cooperate on is no deal. And I still hope that Prime Minister Johnson will not like to go down in history as Mr. No Deal.
Next, the man who's never liked international summits because he thinks they're an opportunity for
Donald
others
Trump
to gang up
and his
against.
daughter there,
His
America.
isolation will become Boris Johnson's problem. More on that later. President Trump settled down for a lonely tete-a-tete lunch with his mercurial friend and host, Emmanuel Macron. So what exactly is the status of their relationship?
We've been friends for a long time, and every once in a while we go at it just a little bit, not very much, but we get along very well. We have a very good relationship, sort of, I think I could say a special relationship.
Yes, that word special doesn't just belong to the UK. Get used to it. Unforeseen events often derail and define G7 summits, and this year is no different. The Amazon fires choking the lungs of the earth may have given the French hosts a clarion call for action. Put out the fires, reboot the climate change agenda, remember the Paris Accords. This leaves Donald Trump, climate change denier-in-chief and friend of the fellow populist running Brazil, isolated. And it leaves Boris Johnson with a problem. Whose side is he on? Here he was sitting down with EU leaders, presumably to thrash out how to avoid a no-deal Brexit that'll hurt everyone around the table, but perhaps no one as much as Britain. He may disagree with them on that, but he sees eye to eye on Iran, climate change, and avoiding a trade war with China, where Donald Trump is isolated. Boris Johnson's dilemma is that he may have to choose between Trump and the rest. He will hope that his bonhomie will provide the secret source of diplomacy, but he may end up feeling as deserted as the beach at Biarritz.
Well, that was very interesting, guys. Very interesting indeed. Some news about that. We're going to see Donald Trump with the president of China next, I think. After this break.
The trade war between the world's two largest economies just boiled over in the span of 280 characters. On Friday, just after U.S. stock markets closed, U.S. President Donald Trump announced via Twitter, starting on October 1st, the $250 billion of goods and products from China currently being taxed at 25% will be taxed at 30%. Additionally, the remaining $300 billion of goods and products from China that was being taxed from September 1st at 10% will now be taxed at 15%. This was Trump's retaliation after Beijing announced a few hours earlier that China will tax an additional $75 billion worth of U.S. goods, also starting next month. That came at the end of an already tumultuous day. Earlier Friday, the U.S. president tweeted an order to American businesses: move supply chains out of China immediately.
Yeah.
Trump does not, in fact, have the power to command U.S. businesses to leave China, but he
No,
does
no.
have leverage.
He can encourage them. He cannot give them government contracts, for example, if they're buying things from the government or trying to sell things to the government. But no, he can't. He can't stop that.
The tweet still spooked investors. The Dow Jones closed more than 2% down. The tech-heavy NASDAQ index was off by 3%, both signs of the importance of the Chinese market to U.S. companies. All this comes at a particularly vulnerable time in Trump's presidency. A growing number of economists forecast a U.S. recession on the horizon, driven partly by the White House trade policies. Trump has responded by blaming everyone but himself.
I think the word recession is a word that's inappropriate because it's just a word that the certain people, I'm going to be kind, certain people in the media are trying to build up because they'd love to see a recession.
Trump also took unprecedented aim at the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The central bank lowered interest rates last month, but not as much as Trump hoped. That earned its chairman this comparison from Trump: who is our bigger enemy, Jay Powell or Chairman Xi, the Chinese leader? President Trump will spend the weekend in France at the G7 meeting with fellow leaders of major industrialized nations. The White House has asked concerns of a global recession to be front and center, and no doubt the U.S.-China trade escalation will dominate those discussions. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
It was quite interesting, but let's see what else we can find with news-wise. Donald Tusk's speech, I think. He decides to go on the G7.
Good afternoon, bonjour. First of all, let me express my best wishes to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. I always attended G7 summits with Jean-Claude, as you know, and I must say I will miss him in Biarritz, and you will miss him too, I am absolutely sure. This is another G7 summit which will be a difficult test of unity and solidarity of the free world and its leaders. There is still no certainty whether the group will be able to find common solutions, and the global challenges are today really serious, or whether it will focus on senseless disputes among each other. The last years have shown that it is increasingly difficult for all of us to find common language when the world needs our cooperation more, not less. This may be the last moment to restore our political community. Today it would be especially urgent and essential to build our unity around the following challenges. First, the defense of liberal democracy, rule of law, and human rights, in particular in the context of the revival of nationalisms and new form of authoritarianism, as well as threats coming from the development of digital technologies, meddling in elections, fake news, using artificial intelligence against citizens and their freedoms. Second, climate crisis and the protection of natural environment, including forests and oceans. The burning Amazon rainforest has become another depressing sign of our times. We of course stand by the EU-Mercosur agreement, which is also about protecting the climate and environment, but it is hard to imagine a harmonious process of ratification by the European countries as long as the Brazilian government allows for the destruction of the green lungs of planet Earth. This is about our to be or not to be. At the same time, The EU is ready to offer financial help to fight the fires. 3. Putting a stop to trade wars. Trade deals and the reform of WTO are better than trade wars. Trade wars will lead to recession, while trade deals will boost the economy. Not to mention the fact that trade wars among G7 members will lead to eroding the already weakened trust among us. 4. The threat of nuclear proliferation. The rejection of the nuclear deal with Iran by the US hasn't brought about any positive results. And the divisions in the Western world when it comes to this issue play into the hands of Iranian ayatollahs as well as Russia and China. G7 leaders should make one more effort to find common language on this. 5. Russia's policy towards its neighbors, especially its aggression against Ukraine. 1 year ago, in Canada, President Trump suggested reinviting Russia to G7, stating openly that Crimea's annexation by Russia was partially justified, and that we should accept this fact. Under no condition can we agree with this logic. When it comes to the speculations around inviting Russia to the table, I would like to say this. First, the reasons why Russia was disinvited in 2014 are still valid. What is more, there are new reasons, such as the Russian provocation on the Azov Sea. Second, when Russia was invited to G7 for the first time, it was believed that it would pursue the path of liberal democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Is there anyone among us who can say with full conviction, not out of business calculation, that Russia is on that path? Today, I will try to convince my interlocutors that it would be better to invite Ukraine, as a guest, of course, to the next G7 meeting to hear the opinion of the new president. I talked with him about it 2 days ago, and I know he would be very interested. Let me also say that the EU has concrete proposals for Africa. We are keeping our long-standing commitment to the Global Fund against AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, and we will contribute 550 million euros to the replenishment of the fund. This means that our overall involvement will exceed 1 billion euros. I am also happy to announce that the EU will join the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, which is an important step in the fight for women's empowerment. The EU's contribution of over 85 million euros will help develop 100,000 businesses run by women. Last but not least, the EU will contribute an initial 1 million euros to the International Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence that Nadia Murad and Dr. Denis Mukwege, winners of the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize, will present to G7 leaders tomorrow. Also tomorrow, on the margins of the summit, I will have a meeting with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He will be third British Conservative Prime Minister with whom I will discuss Brexit. The EU was always open to cooperation. When David Cameron wanted to avoid Brexit, when Theresa May wanted to avoid a no-deal Brexit, And we will also be ready now to hold serious talks with Prime Minister Johnson. The one thing I will not cooperate on is no deal. And I still hope that Prime Minister Johnson will not like to go down in history as Mr. No Deal. We are willing to listen to ideas that are operational, realistic, and acceptable to all member states, including Ireland, if and when the UK government is ready to put them on the table. Thank you.
Well, that was Tusk. Tusk. Syria's war.
No sooner had Abu Ali's family thought they'd found somewhere to stay, the landowner moved them on. This is how it's been for hundreds of thousands of Syrians throughout the 7-year civil war, travelling further and further north to escape the fighting.
This displacement is never ending. I never expected to be in this situation. No one knows what will happen next. The fighters don't seem to know if they should advance or the regime will advance on them.
The traffic is mostly one way as people head away from the advancing government forces towards the last rebel stronghold of Idlib province. The Syrian regime now controls all of the countryside in Hama province, south of Idlib, after taking over with Russian help the last villages and towns that had been in rebel hands. It's all happened under the noses of Turkish soldiers. They're behind this wall in one of a dozen observation posts established to monitor what are supposed to be de-escalation zones.
Our observation posts are not besieged here. Nobody can besiege our troops or observation posts. I want to clarify it. Yes, there are attacks in the region of Idlib. The regime is active around our observation posts. We are discussing this issue with Russia and Iran.
Turkey is also worried that regime advances will push more than 500,000 Syrians to its border.
The regime has taken everything. They are giving us a kicking. Yesterday, 6 helicopters over our heads forced us to leave. All night there was bombing. The ground was shaking under our legs.
Turkey's president has told his Russian counterpart that Syrian military attacks in northwestern Syria are causing a humanitarian crisis. Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Vladimir Putin that what's happening there threatens Turkish national security. It's one of the reasons Turkey is so keen to get a safe zone up and running on the Syrian side of the border. But so far, there's still no indication that Turkey has agreed with the US military on who will patrol this zone and how deep into Syria it will go. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Antakya.
Well, more violence around the world.
Boris Johnson makes his global debut at the annual G7 summit, but things could get a little awkward. Stuck between EU leaders and Trump, Boris could find himself in a bit of a pickle, as leaders remain at loggerheads over policy and global trade. But what, if anything, will Boris gain? Boris isn't exactly the most popular man in Europe right now. At the same time as trying to reach a deal with the EU, Boris has the tricky job of wooing Donald Trump with a potential trade deal. Trump has made it clear that after Brexit, he'll be there with open arms to strike a trade deal with the UK.
We're working already on a trade agreement, and I think it'll be a very substantial trade agreement. With the UK, we could do much more trade, and we expect to do that. Okay?
While in Biarritz, it's expected the two men will
Donald
agree a
Trump
roadmap
and
to how a future
Boris
deal
Johnson.
may look, including a timetable for negotiations. But trade isn't the only topic Boris needs to worry about this weekend. One of the big questions, will everyone even get along? Trump is notorious for his behaviour
That's
at
Merkel.
G7 summits. Here he is in Canada last year being confronted by Angela Merkel and other world leaders. He later left that summit before it even finished. He also railed against Justin Trudeau, calling him meek and mild as the summit's host. This year, it looks like Emmanuel Macron is drawing his battle lines. With a large portion of the Amazon rainforest on fire, he's made climate change his top agenda item, a subject Trump has repeatedly disagreed with, most famously pulling out of the Paris Accord.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
And that leaves Boris Johnson stuck in the middle. He'll have the challenge of trying to have Trump on side while disagreeing with him on fundamental issues like the importance of the Paris Agreement.
The combination of two personalities who are not well known for their self-control is indeed going to be an unprecedented occasion.
Trump has also said it might be time for Russia to be readmitted into the G7, something Johnson also disagrees with. No one knows which side the British Prime Minister will fall on, but if he can manage placating everyone, he may indeed come away as the big winner.
Yeah, let's hope he does. Bloody hell. This was like 2 hours ago with Merkel and other people. Macron now as well. There's Merkel. Boris Johnson. Macron, Merkel, other guy, and French persons in between as well.
This is the Euro caucus.
Oh, bloody blimey. Just thinking ahead, guys. I mean, this is a short video, like I say. Hope you all enjoyed it. And before I go, I'm going to do one more video on this. Then we can move on.
Protesters in Srinagar throwing stones. The response from Indian security forces.
India. You got India here as well, guys. Problems in India.
Began at one mosque, where Friday prayers have taken a defiant tone this month, since the region's autonomy was revoked by New Delhi. It's one of the few ways locals have to vent their frustrations. Restrictions have been imposed on the use of the internet and mobile phones, and they're finding it difficult to move around the city and beyond.
This is a bad thing. For almost 3 weeks, we've been under restrictions, and we're not happy about it. They've torn up our autonomy and put us under curfew. No one is going out as a neighborhood.
Unlike in previous weeks, security was tightened on Fridays to curtail potential unrest.
Whether restrictions are eased or reimposed for Friday prayers, protests have followed, and this time is no exception. It's not just restrictions that's angering locals, it's the long-term consequences of the region losing its autonomy.
One consequence of that is that people from outside Indian-administered Kashmir can now buy property, whereas before you had to be a permanent resident. Many here worry that will change the makeup of the region.
वो कश्मीर से है वो शायद
Kashmiri people would not sell land to outsiders, I don't think. But if you see how the government of India has put us under military control, they might try to make colonies of outsiders here. That would change the demography of Kashmir. That's what they want.
Some analysts say that's in line with the government's Hindu nationalist ideology.
Falsely erroneous notion which they have been selling to their people that Kashmir is the birthplace of Hinduism and we have to reclaim Kashmir. What they will do, forcibly it is Gaza type model. Forcibly they will make settlements in Kashmir.
But Indian government officials say the removal of Kashmir's autonomy will bring development to the region. But that's not how many of the people here see the situation. The protests are likely to continue. Bez Jamil, Al Jazeera, Srinagar, Indian administered Kashmir.
Well, guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit short, but thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, subscribe, share these videos with your friends, and I will catch you all in the next stream. Thank you for joining me, and take it easy, guys. Peace. Do that, guys. Peace.